Welcome back to The Explainer. Now, I want you to picture something for a second. Think about a major international war. Usually when we hear that word, we're imagining years of grueling conflict, right? Or, at the very least, months of really drawn-out strategic battles. But what if I told you about a devastating, full-scale war that kicked off in the morning and was entirely over before most people had even finished their breakfast? I'm talking no years, no months, not even a full hour. Today we're unpacking one of the most mind-boggling true stories in human history, a conflict so incredibly brief that a lot of people honestly still think it's a myth.
38. That is the number we're focusing on today. The entire Anglo-Zanzibar War, fought between the absolutely massive British Empire and the Sultanate of Zanzibar on August 27, 1896, lasted just 38 to 45 minutes. Officially, it holds the record as the absolute shortest war in human history. But you have to wonder, how do two sovereign nations actually go to war for less time than it takes to watch a single episode of a sitcom? And why on earth did the globe-spanning British Empire decide to unleash its full military might on such a small island kingdom? Let's get into it.
Section 1. The Island of Zanzibar, Wealth and Empire.
To really wrap our heads around how a war could literally be this short, we've got to travel back over 130 years to the late 19th century, right off the eastern coast of Africa. Now, Zanzibar wasn't just some picturesque little island. It was an absolute powerhouse. It was one of the richest trading hubs in all of East Africa. Every single day, you had merchants from Arabia, India, and Europe just crowding its bustling ports, primarily exporting incredibly valuable goods like cloves and ivory. And, naturally, because of all this immense wealth and its prime strategic location, powerful countries were hovering, practically drooling to get a piece of the action. So while Zanzibar officially had its own independent ruler called the Sultan, the aggressively expanding British Empire was essentially acting as this massive shadow power. The British held enormous, really unchecked political influence over practically everything happening on the island.
Section 2. A sudden royal crisis. The spark.
So the spark that actually ignited this whole powder keg happened on August 25, 1896, when Sultan Hamid died completely out of nowhere. And honestly, to this day, historians still debate the exact cause of his sudden death. But almost immediately after, his cousin, Khalid bin Bargash, makes a really bold move. He swoops in, occupies the royal palace, and declares himself the brand new Sultan of Zanzibar. But there was a massive problem with this. He didn't ask Britain for permission. See, according to some earlier treaties that were heavily forced upon Zanzibar, no new sultan could officially take the throne without the British saying it was okay. And the British, well, they strongly preferred a totally different candidate, someone who'd be, let's say, a lot more cooperative with their own colonial interests. So Britain demanded Khalid step down, and Khalid just flat out refused.
This kicked off what I can only describe as an incredibly rapid deterioration of diplomacy. Over the next couple of days, British officials were just entirely fed up with this defiance. So they sent a very simple, extremely stern ultimatum to Khalid. Leave the palace, step down from the throne, and disband your soldiers. And they didn't leave it open-ended. They gave him a strict, hard deadline. He had until exactly 9 a.m. on August 27, 1896 to comply. If he refused, Britain promised they would open fire.
Now, Khalid firmly believed the British were just bluffing, so he dug his heels in. It was a classic David versus Goliath scenario, but, spoiler alert, without the whole underdog victory part. Khalid managed to gather nearly 3,000 defenders around his palace. This was a really mixed group of palace guards, local civilians, and a small military force, mostly just armed with standard rifles and a handful of older cannons. Oh, and his entire naval fleet? It was literally a single royal yacht named the Glasgow. On the other side, you have modern British naval warships quietly but ominously moving into position right outside the harbor. The stage was perfectly set for a totally devastating clash.
Moving on to Section 3. The 38-minute war. The ultimatum expires.
So, the clock is ticking closer and closer to the deadline. You can only imagine the tension in the air. It must have been absolutely suffocating. And exactly at 9 a.m., Khalid realized he made a fatal miscalculation. He hadn't surrendered. And within moments, the British fleet just unleashed hell. This wasn't some minor skirmish, guys. It was rapid, total devastation. These powerful modern naval guns started a merciless bombardment directly onto the palace. Now, because the palace buildings were largely made of wood, these huge artillery shells just ripped right through them. Walls were collapsing instantly. Roofs were catching on fire. Khalid's defenders tried to shoot back with their few cannons, but they stood absolutely no chance against armored British warships. Out in the harbor, a single British shell hit Khalid's royal yacht, the Glasgow, and sent it straight to the bottom of the ocean. The defenders definitely fought bravely, but the sheer scale of destruction was entirely one-sided.
By roughly 9:38 a.m., this once magnificent royal palace had literally been reduced to a devastating, smoking pile of splintered wood. And right in the middle of all this chaos, the Sultan's flag, which had been flying proudly up above the palace, was shot completely down by the British artillery. Now, if you know military protocol, the lowering or the falling of a flag is the official signal of defeat and surrender. As soon as that flag hit the ground, the firing stopped almost immediately. The war was officially over, just 38 minutes after the first shot was fired.
Which brings us to Section 4, Aftermath and Legacy, the cost of 38 minutes.
While the whole bombardment lasted barely longer than a lunch break, the casualty disparity here was staggering. Honestly, it's horrifying. In just over half an hour of fighting, around 500 people on the Zanzibar side were killed or wounded, mostly just from the exploding shells and those wooden buildings collapsing around them. And on the British side, just one single sailor was seriously injured. This brutal contrast wasn't just a tragic loss of life. It was a terrifyingly clear, real-world demonstration of the absolutely unmatched military advantage the British Empire wielded at the time.
But what about Khalid, right? The guy who actually started this whole standoff. Well, in this crazy historical twist, while his palace was quite literally disintegrating around him, Khalid managed to slip out through a back entrance. He fled straight to the nearby German consulate. Germany, who obviously had their own colonies in East Africa, completely refused Britain's demands to hand him over. Instead, a few weeks later, German officials secretly smuggled Khalid out on a warship over to German East Africa. He actually managed to dodge the British for years, just hiding out in exile, until British forces finally tracked him down and captured him decades later during the First World War.
When we step back and really look at the sheer speed of this conflict, we've got to ask, why did it end so incredibly fast? Well, it was essentially the perfect storm of military asymmetry. First off, Britain possessed vastly superior, completely modern naval weapons. Second, Zanzibar's defenses were incredibly outdated and just not equipped to handle a naval bombardment of any kind. Third, the actual physical structure of that wooden palace meant it stood zero chance against heavy artillery. It just disintegrated on impact. And finally, the strict adherence to traditional military rules meant that the very second that flag fell, all resistance practically ended on the spot.
And the political fallout? Just as swift as the military one. Britain got exactly what they wanted from the very beginning. The dust hadn't even settled before they installed a new, extremely pro-British Sultan. This was a ruler who fully, 100% supported their policies. So even though Zanzibar officially kept its title of having its own Sultan, it was strictly in name only from that point on. British influence clamped down super hard, and for decades following those 38 minutes, Britain completely controlled practically every single aspect of the island's political affairs. An entire sovereign nation's trajectory was permanently, completely altered before lunchtime.
All of this brings us to a really profound realization. History is not always measured in years. Today, we don't remember the Anglo-Zanzibar War because it was some sprawling, massive global conflict. We remember it precisely because of its brevity. It really stands as this stark, almost unbelievable symbol of the late 19th century. It just goes to show how unchecked political disputes, ruthless colonial ambitions, and a massive, massive gap in military technology can violently intersect to completely reshape world history in an instant.
I mean, think about it. In less than an hour, a ruler lost his throne, a historic palace was totally wiped off the map, hundreds of lives were tragically cut short or forever changed, and a global empire just tightened its iron grip. It is a historical event so unbelievably brief that students today are just floored to learn that an entire international war could literally start and finish before a single school class is dismissed. So I want to leave you with this thought to carry with you today. If 38 minutes, just 38 minutes, can completely rewrite a nation's future, how do we really measure the weight of history? Thanks so much for exploring this wild slice of the past with me today. Keep asking those big questions, keep digging into the details, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.